Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dave Mockholtz. I want to take a moment and welcome you to Creating an EV Curriculum. We're going to spend about an hour today talking about a problem that I think is probably a common one for many schools around the country right now, and that is how do we implement EV curriculum? How do we design it? How do we make it happen? And ultimately cover a lot of the topics that are very, very relevant to this pressing topic. I want to take a moment to recognize our collaborators today. One is the North American Council of Automotive Teachers, a wonderful organization whose 50th anniversary is this year. And if you have not already done so, please check out nacat.org for a good overview of the program, as well as registration for the NACAT event. With that being said, there are still registrations available, so please visit them and check it out. Hopefully we'll see you out there. I also want to recognize Electude, which is a technical training partner of Advanced Vehicle Technology Group. We'll cover this a little bit more in detail throughout the presentation. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Dave Mockholtz. I may have met you in passing or at an event around the country with a variety of different organizations, but most recently, I've served as Assistant Dean of Transportation Programs at Suffolk County Community College, a PhD student and ECMC Foundation Research Fellow at Old Dominion University, where I'm studying automotive certifications and the correlation between automotive certification and technician earnings. And I'm president and CEO of Advanced Vehicle Technology Group, LLC. In our travels at Suffolk County Community College, we have had the pleasure of working with great organizations, including GM-ASEP, Toyota T10, Honda Pact, and over the last 5 or 6 years, Ford Ace, Subaru University, Mopar Cap, a few familiar names there, including Tesla. We were at Tesla Start School for a 3-year period. So with that, at Suffolk, I also have served as on the Excelsior Automotive Task Force. And on the Excelsior Automotive Task Force, we've worked with the state of New York to look at curriculum and to look at instruction for automotive technology programs. Justin, if you could just hit mute. And ultimately, with working with those programs, have looked at how to implement programs that lead to great student outcomes. You may also know me from Motor Age. I've been writing for Motor Age for over 10 years on the subject of automotive electricity, electronics, education. And I've been a technical training manager and an instructor for WorldPAC for about 10 years as well. So one of the things that I wanted to start with today is looking at the problem that we have, in terms of EV education broadly, and whether this is at the OE level or whether this is at our schools. The workforce may be unprepared for the transition to advanced technology vehicles. And if you look at the statistics from ASC on the L3 Advanced Hybrid Electric Vehicle Technician Certification, as of right now, ASE lists 3,409 technicians in the US that hold that certification. So when you look at the population of technicians, how many technicians are in the workforce in the United States? Anybody know a rough number? If you said about 800,000 automotive technicians, that's correct. If you said probably closer to 1 million, if you start to include transit and heavy duty, that's also correct, probably exceeds 1 million. So when you think about that number is extraordinarily low. And from my understanding, a good portion of the folks that hold that right now are instructors themselves. When you look at other certification programs, you also start to see that there's a relatively low number of folks that are certified. So that puts us in a unique position as educators, right? The things that we're hearing. We're struggling to fix the vehicles we have now. We're sending cars back to the dealer. We can't diagnose and fix them from a fleet manager in Suffolk County, New York. By 2030, we'll be 100% electric. Our technicians are struggling with electrical diagnostics now, and we are going to need technicians who can solve complex electrical problems. This may sound familiar. I employ 12 technicians at my Lexus dealership, and 10 of 12 hold none of the 8 ASE certifications required to become master technicians. Please help. And ultimately, what are we hearing from instructors in regard to EV curriculum? What do we teach? Where do we start in that process? Where do I find funding to set up these programs and carry out these programs, as they could get very expensive? And ultimately, where does it all fit? So those are questions that we want to start to try to answer today, and we're not going to quite do it in an hour, but we'll hopefully get a good start. So in terms of how we've addressed this through AVTG, last week we were actually out in Chicago at Joliet Junior College, and we ran a three-day EV instructor boot camp for college instructors to work through some of these very problems. We'll be offering 2 of these events later this summer, next month, July 19th to 21st, in conjunction with the ASE Education Foundation event. It's actually the Friday, Saturday, and Sunday that follow. And then the following week in Indianapolis, in conjunction with NACAT, July 26th, 27th, and 8th, again, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday of that week. We still have a few seats available in each event. I'll go ahead and put that link up in the chat here as we go through the presentation. In terms of, as a company, how we see EV training and what the pathway is, and this may look very, very familiar to schools and OEs and whatnot. We start with basically awareness and safety. In our case, when we're doing this for technicians, it's a 2-day safety course followed by ASE high voltage safety certification. And then we have a series of boot camps, 3-day boot camps for low voltage electrical, electronics, high voltage AC and DC, and then certification and continuing education through webinars, model specific training, certification review, et cetera. And more or less, as we go through these different classes intended for technicians, what we're realizing is a lot of the curriculum that we need has to be compiled as we go through, right? Because there's not a lot of extant curriculum that's out there. So with that, we've had great success offering these 2-day classes. One of the things you may think about doing if you're a community college program is offering continuing ed. We've been quite successful with doing that, and have done this at this point multiple times in the Northeast and across the U.S. Just going to curate through these, but I want to kind of get to where we're going to go. Okay. So what is an industry standard? All of our programs are defined by industry standard. The definition from Penn State says industry standards are voluntary agreements that establish requirements for products, practices, or operations in a given field. In the United States, most standards development occurs within the private sector, right? And how are these compiled? Well, they can be compiled through a literature review. And what does that mean exactly? Well, if there are other existing standards documents, that's a great place to start. Once standards are somewhat come up with, they can further be developed through focus groups and qualitative assessment tools, where we impanel people from industry, cross-section of industry, managers, technicians, et cetera, right? And ultimately come up with what our standards are going to be, right? And then those standards get validated through industry consensus. So if you've ever participated in any of the survey processes from ASE, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about in terms of getting a survey. I think most recently, I got an email from Dave Johnson, president of ASE, asking for some feedback on the A1. And that's essentially the continuous process of developing industry standards. So when we look at standards organizations for EV, one of the things that you start to see is this goes beyond just ASE, right? What we've known as technician standards. We have organizations such as the National Fire Protection Association, who provides feedback and standards on safety as it relates to electric vehicles. We have SAE, who's very involved in these standards, right? As we've all grown up with as technicians, whether, when we think of J, right, like J2534 as an example, J standards through the Society of Automotive Engineers, ISO, International Association of Fire Chiefs, again related to safety, We're seeing some European influence here in the US on EV standards, things like the UN ECER 100. If you've ever been to any SSF training with a fellow named Dirk Fuchs, that's heavily based on these UN ECER 100 standards. We also have NEVTEX. If you haven't heard of NEVTEX before, it's definitely something that you will want to look at. NEVTEX was a National Science Foundation grant that was out at, I believe, Portland Community College with a gentleman named Ken Mays. And that National Science Foundation grant funded the development of a set of EV standards as well as fuel cell standards, very much of interest to the automotive community and automotive education community. Lastly, American Public Transportation Association, or APTA, actually has a set of industry standards for transit bus. Right? So one of the challenges is, well, which one do you use? And the answer is you probably use a bit of all of them. In terms of program standards, right? Program standards, one of the things over the years that I've struggled with is we have industry standards that define what skills and competencies an industry technician might need to hold. But program standards are a little bit different in that we have to address these from an educational perspective of what can we teach. And typically program standards are going to be in alignment with industry standards. However, we also have parameters and restrictions in a program, such as time, right? Resources, when those resources could be time-based, they could be instructor-based, they could be funding-based, right? So program standards have to be developed in a way that are reasonably reasonable for the school to be able to attain. NEVTEX does supply some program standards, and APTA, to a certain extent, they talk about what they would like to see in a training curriculum as far as transit bus comes into play. Why do we need to talk about all three of them when regards to EV? Because a lot of the EV, call it technology, you're familiar with the terminology from XEV, I hope. If not, we'll go over that here momentarily. But EV could be anything from a Chevy Bolt to a $1 million transit bus. And a lot of the technologies are, while they're different, are very, very similar and have a lot of the core competencies. So all three of these organizations are worthwhile taking a look into as you begin to plan for developing an EV curriculum for your organization. We also need to look at certifications. More or less, we want certifications to align with what we are teaching and what we want the students to be able to attain at the end of a program of study, at the end of a course, right? And ultimately how that fits into a hierarchy of a curriculum overall. So in the world of certification research, we just define a certification as an alternative to a license that is typically offered through a third-party certification body or industry standard organization in alignment with industry standards. So who does that sound like? If you said ASC, that was likely the group that came to mind, right? That's been recognized in our industry for quite some time. The key component is, if you read that definition, it is an independent organization, third-party organization, right? As you realize, ASC does not typically provide training, right? It's because they want to keep the certification and the training separate to maintain the defensibility of that certification. Certification is also different than a certificate, which is typically provided upon the completion of a course of study. And certifications typically have to go through a rigorous process, which makes them legally defensible. As an example, in order to make a multiple choice question legally defensible, it has to go through quite a series of review in terms of psychometrics and things like that. It's quite expensive to do. So things to think about here in terms of what a certification is, right? When we talk about technician certification in our industry, the name that always comes to mind is ASE, right? And also manufacturer-specific certification. And most recently, ASE launched what they call the XEV certification in March of 2023. There is a set of standards that surrounds that, and it's definitely worth looking into. There's also a certifying organization as a result of the NEVTEX grant called Electrified Transportation Pro Plus. If any of you have not seen that organization before, it's worth a look into. A gentleman named Mark Quarto provides most of the training and certification for that organization. And that certification is housed in SAE Probitas, which is a clearinghouse essentially for certifications. Also, on the bottom, you'll see IMI, and that might seem a little unfamiliar to some folks, but IMI is Institute for the Motor Industry, not a US-based certification, but still worth looking at as an example of how technicians are being certified internationally. They actually have a 4-step certification process through IMI. So to give you a little background on each one, EV Pro Plus, 4-level program. Sound familiar? There's prerequisite online learning, multi-day course for each level. The thing here is you have to take the course from EV Pro Plus to take the certification exam. As of June of 24, listed on the website, there are 80 certificate holders in the US. All right, so again, speaks to the issue that we have that we don't know who's trained and we don't know to what level they're trained, because quite a few of the technicians that are certified, if you look at that number, it's not even close to 0.5% of the total technician population. ASE's XEV certification, if you've not looked at this, this is a great starting point for schools to look at, especially. They have a level 1 and level 2. Level 1 and level 2 here are a little bit different than level 1 and level 2 and let's say EV Pro Plus or IMI, in that level 1 is designed as an electrical safety awareness certification, and level 2 is designed as a technician electrical safety certification. So if you're training technicians and service personnel directly related to the technician role, you would be teaching to essentially level 2. These standards are available free of charge right online, and are a great starting point for incorporating this into your safety at your institution. Cost of these is basically twofold. One cost for level 1 and another for level 2, and $38.99 for XEV level 1 and $49.99 for XEV level 2. And these are valid for 3 years. Unlike other ASE tests, you could do these right online. There are vouchers available through ASE if you are looking to implement this at your school and want to make this something that you incorporate. I will also mention that CCAR, who I should have included here, also has a certificate program very similar to XEV that is available through a lot of the publishers, the industry publishers, Electude, et cetera, at both the instructor and the student level. So another thing to think about. The L3, all right, many of you are probably familiar with the L3 certification exam. One of the challenges with the L3 standards are they're not only electric vehicle, but they're hybrid electric vehicle. So as we start to look at electric vehicle programs and make a determination of what we want our electric vehicles to programs to look like, if they're pure EV programs that don't include engine repair, it's going to be very, very difficult for a student to pass the ASE L3. So it's really going to depend on a great set of standards, but it's going to depend on how you choose to implement electric vehicle curriculum with your organization. So one thing we'll look at is all these different certifications, their intended audience, prerequisites, and whether or not they're industry recognized, right? So at the moment, the XEV certification, level 1 and level 2, as we said, the broader EV workforce, technicians for level 1 and level 2, respectively. There are no prerequisites. They do suggest training, but they are not currently recognized as a part of any OEM's training pathway. Isuzu Trucks, I believe, right now is the only one that physically requires it. ASE L3 is intended for advanced level technicians, and because of that, the prerequisites are A6 and A8. And industry recognized? Technically, yes, but not an OEM requirement for all OEs. I know Toyota right now is requiring it, and I believe General Motors as well. There may be others that I'm missing, but not universally required. But to speak to the prerequisites a bit, A6, right, as a prerequisite is also a challenge because there's only about 120,000 folks roughly in the United States that hold the A6, right? So if they don't have both the A6 and the A8, they can't technically take the L3. EV Pro Plus, intended audience for that, technicians. There's multiple certification levels. You have to take the EV Pro Plus training, but that also is not required by any OEM. Right? IMI, right, is intended for technicians. The prerequisites are unclear. In fact, somewhat convoluted to even find what the industry standards are related to IMI. And they're also based in the UK. So the challenge that we have here is typically we have always gone back to a standard and an industry recognized standard when developing a curriculum. In the case of EV, right? Well, it's not quite clear that we're there yet, right? So on top of that, we have other new players in this realm in terms of certifications. There's a group, many of you I'm sure have seen Legacy EV. Legacy EV is a company out of the Arizona area, very deeply involved with SEMA and very interested in what do we do with internal combustion engine vehicles, specifically older vehicles in the classic car market that's been a multi-billion-dollar car market for ages. And they're also creating some certified EV technician programs, more or less for installers or folks that are converting vehicles to electrified chassis and powertrains and whatnot. So something to look at as educators, but again, is intended for maybe a different audience than what some of you might be after. So just as a straw poll, the majority of you on this call today, it looked like are at post-secondary institutions. All right, most of your post-secondary institutions, you're going to want to probably make sure that you're aligning with standards that are going to best benefit your employers. That being said, if you have a heavy aftermarket presence in your program, this might be something to look at as well. So that brings us to where we are today. I say EV programming, the fence and the ostrich, right? For many, many years, I feel like as an industry, we've been sitting on a fence, right? Well, which way are we going to go, right? I'm on the fence. I'm not sure if this is going to be internal combustion engine based program. I'm not sure if this is going to be a program that is going to be strictly EV, right? And that's, I think, probably half the population of instructors that are out there right now trying to figure out that pathway. And then we have our folks, the ostrich, right? The ostrich group. And you'll notice the ostrich has his head in the sand. And I say jokingly that a good group of our friends in education are in this group with their heads in the sand going, I hope the next 5 years goes by really quick so I can get to retirement and not have to deal with this, right? Because this is a huge task to take on. So our goal with the work that we're doing with AVTG is to help instructors get off the fence, right? Reverse the ostrich, right? Get your head out of the sand and let's see what the way forward is. So when we look at what we're going to do, and this could be high schools, colleges, this could be OEs, we have to look at what our existing courses are, and we have to make some decisions, right? Typically, post-secondary automotive institutions that are ASE accredited, for the most part, have one course in every ASE area and are typically doubled up in some areas, typically electrical, typically engine performance. So as we start to look at curriculum, one of the things we need to do is we need to begin with the end in mind, right? And if you've ever taken a course on curriculum development, this is very much the way the curriculum is developed, right? I also like to talk about apathetic, right, instructional design or empathic instructional design, right? What does it mean to have empathy for someone, right? Essentially, to put yourself in their shoes, right? So depending on who our students are, this may look a little bit different, right? If we're at the high school level, right, EV instruction and curriculum is going to look very different than at an OEM who's after very, very different things, right? The intended audiences are different, right? So you have to know your audience. But in the end, the employers are all the same, right? So we'll kind of tie this together here in a moment. But we need to start to look at, a course like engine repair. Does that stay, right? Do we replace it with something? Do we merge it with something else? Right? If you're teaching a hybrid curriculum, it certainly can't go away, or maybe it's a blend of that and engine performance, but that's a decision to be made. Automatic and manual drivetrain. I always say in classes, what percentage of vehicles was made last year with a manual drivetrain, right? Way, way less vehicles than let's say, a hybrid vehicle or electric vehicle, right? In terms of percentage of vehicles made and delivered. So that being said, might that be an area that we can merge and create a drivetrains class that's specific to EV? We have steering, suspension, brakes, right? Those are not going away, right? Electrical one, electrical two, that's certainly not going away. If anything, we need more. Heating and air conditioning, perhaps that becomes thermal management systems class. And engine performance one and performance two might be an area where if you go strictly EV, become more electrical courses per se, right? But that brings us to a whole nother conversation is if you're ASE accredited and you're going down the EV pathway, how do you deal with that? And that's a tricky question. I think when you start to look at tasks in A1 through A8, including foundational tasks in the entirety of a 2-year program, there are 405 tasks, right, in a 1,200-hour program. So if you break that down and you start to reverse engineer that, that's a lot of tasks to cover. And now I understand that there's a priority order, your P1s, your P2s, and your P3s, as you build the curriculum or as you look at your own individual curriculum at your school. But the reason I pose this is, well, where does ADAS fit? Where does electrified powertrain fit? Where do batteries fit? Right? So when we start to add tasks for those areas, we run into a little bit of a complex problem, right? 405 divided by 1,200 is roughly 3 hours per task, right? If we have to measure the student's ability to do those tasks, we have to cut those hours by even more because we need time for assessment. And I think you kind of see what we're after here. This came up recently in a conversation that I was having with Luke Murray, one of the training managers at WorldPack. And we were talking about the 1,200-hour program and one of the few of the issues that we have with the 1,200-hour program, right? As I said, one task every 3 hours for a 1,200-hour program. What about downtime in class? What about assessment? What happens if something doesn't go the way we think it's going to go that particular day, which happens, right? Every instructor on this call knows that well. How do we know the students can do what we're teaching them, right? And where does new content fit when existing content is too extensive? Like I said before, ADAS, where does that go? How many hours is that, right? And I don't think the answer can continually be it fits in one of the buckets that already exists, right? So we kind of have a problem, right? The other problem is this. How do we know the students can do what we're teaching them, right? I feel, and I felt this very strongly when I started teaching, and I often share a story about my first year teaching. It was 2009. I walked into an automotive classroom for the first time, and I taught next to some really strong instructors. One thing that stood out to me was there were 4 different classrooms, and those 4 different classrooms were covering 2 ASE areas each. It was a 1,200-hour program over 2 years. So I was surprised. I said to Steve, my co-teacher, I said, why are we teaching all of these tests? He goes, well, that's what we're told to do, right? That's part of our accreditation. I said, but there's no way that you can teach all of these tests. He says, well, we don't have to teach all of them. We have to teach a percentage of them. I said, well, are you confident that all the students leaving can get a job and do the things that they need to do when they leave us? And he said, no. I said, so why are we doing that? right? And I think, to a certain extent, we're compounding this problem now, right? So one of the points that Luke Murray and I were talking about, he was just about to give a class at the World Pack Expo for apprentices, and we were talking about, so that there's 1,200 hours of instruction. And he said to me, Dave, he goes, you have a master's degree, right? And he said, you're working on your PhD? I said, yeah. He said, well, how many hours in your master's degree? And I said, boy, that's a good question. I said, well, if you take, it's 30 credits, right? And if you take 15 hours in a credit hour, that's 450 hours. So he goes, okay. He goes, well, what about your PhD? I said, well, there's a lot of outside preparation. He goes, well, isn't there a lot of outside preparation in automotive? Don't the students have to do co-op and don't they have to do all these different things? So I said, yeah, you have a point. And I said, well, said my PhD program is 60 credit hours. It's 45 of instruction. And yeah, if you do the math on that, that's a 900-hour program to get a PhD. And he goes, okay. And looking at me, sort of the affirmation of I could see where he was going with this, right? How many hours in a bachelor's degree? Right? In a bachelor's degree, there's typically 120 plus credits, and you're talking an 1,800-hour program. So my message is this. If we already have a 1,200-hour program, unless we are significantly moving the needle for our students in terms of skill outcome, right, that immediately results in a higher level of employability in terms of salary, let's say, why wouldn't the student just go get a 4-year degree? And I think that's a realistic question that we all have to ask ourselves, right? So to that point, I think when we start to design curriculum, we have to look at this differently, right? I often ask, with 1,200 hours of instructional time, what percentage of your students are leaving the program ASE Master Certified? Right? And I'll leave that out there, right? Because I think I know the answer, right? I remember when I started at Suffolk Community College, share another story briefly that ties in. I went out on a dealer visit my first semester. I was teaching in the Honda Pact program, and I went to a Honda dealership and was proudly wearing my Suffolk shirt. And I walked in, and the gentleman said to me, the service manager, he says, "You work there?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "I work in the automotive program." I was so proud to be a Honda Pact instructor and tell him I was teaching in that program. This was back in 2010. And he says to me, "Well, I got a problem with you." I'm like, "Oh, okay." He says, the students that you send me, they go through a 2-year program, and I have to reteach them all the foundational skills when they get here. So that was a gut punch moment for me, right? In realizing, wow, we're trying to get 1,200 hours into a 2-year program with the idea of covering this broad range of content. But what did we do to make sure that the students could do the things that our advisory boards were telling us that they needed to do at the end of the program, right? And I think that's when we start to look at accreditation, we start to look at EV programming, we have to look at this through a different lens, right? Ultimately, beginning with the end in mind, right? So when we begin with the end in mind, which of these courses do we need? Right? And what are the skills related to these courses that the students are going to be able to do, right? There's a depth of curricular content that you could go to here that borderlines engineering, right? I think all of you would agree. But the reality of it is, we also have to realize that when the students leave us and they go out to the world of work, that there's an expectation by the employer of what they're what they're going to be able to do. And if they can't do the things that they need to be able to do, then what good is teaching them engineering level content, right? And I'll kind of leave that there for a moment, right? So as we look through, as instructors, we need, in terms of developing curriculum, we need to build a major topics crosswalk from existing industry standards. So looking at XEV, looking at ASE, looking at EV Pro Plus and maybe the APTA standards and crosswalking those. And if you don't know what I mean by crosswalking, let's say one of those standards documents has electric vehicle safety, right? We would look at the tasks involved in each of those and put that in one subheading. right? And then we might look at, low voltage electrical skills. And basically what you're trying to accomplish is you're trying to look at all these different curriculum or standards and take those standards and build basically a major topic outline. You can also do this by looking at, there's a wealth of publisher content out there, and you can make a determination of what content they're covering. And then ultimately, what you want to do is you want to align this content around what the students need to be able to do, right? And this doesn't matter if it's secondary or high-level OE, right? We have to think about, why are we doing the exercises that we're doing, and why are we doing the activities that we're doing? What does this result in terms of employability and what they're going to be able to do on the car? In terms of OEM resources, another good place to go to. Just about every manufacturer at this point has an educational program that will provide some resources to schools, whether it's access just to service information or access even just to their curriculum map, and provide a good starting point for looking at what your curriculum should look like. In terms of publisher resources, there's a multitude of publishers and books out there, whether it's Kurt Ward and Jim Halderman through Pearson, Dr. Quartu, who I mentioned before, and Dr. Goodnight through CDX, a gentleman named Sean Bennett at GW, and Jacker Javik, Nathan Smith, and Mike Godson. And one exercise that's not a bad exercise to go through as well, as I mentioned before, is go through the table of contents. And flesh out whatever's in there and start to build your major topics outline based on the information that you see there, right? There's also e-learning resources out there. I mentioned before, AVTG is the training partner for Electude. One of the hardest things about teaching electricity and electronics to students is you can't see it, right? So e-learning resources such as those provided through Electude. Electude has some fantastic resources for electric drive, but also reverse engineering their software and figuring out where those topics fit is also a good starting point. In terms of training aids and devices that are out there, because when you start to go through topics, you have to start to go through, well, if I need to have a student demonstrate their ability to do certain things, then we're going to need a way to do that, right? And that may be in the form of vehicles, right? It may be in the form of training aids, and whether you go to ATEC or Consulab or AVI or Lucas Nula or Electude, each of them have their own unique application for training aids. Electude, as an example, has those types of training aids that will enable a program to teach high voltage electrical skills, teach a milliohm meter, teach a mega ohm meter at 400 volts without having a dangerous level of voltage. So these boards replicate a high voltage scenario. So different ways of thinking about how you might address hands-on skills really should be an underlying part of when you start to map out what your curriculum looks like. Vehicles, right? We also have to think about, as we design curriculum, what vehicles are we designing it to? Every state right now is tracking through the U.S. Department of Energy the number of electrified vehicles. And there's sites pretty much in every state that will have some content resources and things like that. And more or less, taking from that, how many electrified vehicles are on the road in each state. Typically, I live in the state of New York. I can tell you right off the bat that the Tesla Model 3, Tesla Model Y are the two of the most popular, and then you can basically follow sort of in reverse hierarchy. But when we're designing instruction, again, beginning with the end user, where are our students going to work, right? Who's the local employer, right? Aligning vehicles in terms of vehicle purchases, which it looks to be like you're going to have to do, right? You're going to have to buy some vehicles. You want to buy vehicles that have alignment, right? I, for one, think the Ford Mach-E is pretty cool, but if the Ford Mach-E is not a high seller, a top seller in my market, then designing curriculum around it might be nice if it's the only thing I can get. But to my point, we want to make sure that we're meeting employment needs, right? And if the biggest employer is Tesla or Rivian in your market, right, it doesn't probably make sense to have a Ford or a Chevy product. You guys may have seen Hertz in the news. Hertz is a decent place to start. I know in my market, you can get a Tesla Model 3 with about 80,000 miles on it for about $23,000, right? So something to think about. Parts are another thing that we have to think about, right? That we're going to have to source. Don't go out and buy all new stuff, right? The power of the internet is a pretty amazing thing. Companies like Copart, companies like LKQ, uh, eBay, right? Facebook Marketplace are all decent places to start. As you can see in this slide here, picking up a battery junction block or system main relays for a Toyota for 25 bucks, right? Not a bad deal, right? And granted, I understand there are procurement rules in each market that you're going to have to deal with, but more or less, those are kind of ways to start thinking about how we look at this differently. What I really want to kind of hit home is, and I mentioned this again before, is when we come up with our major content outline and what we think we're going to want to deliver to students, your advisory board is the key player, right? Your advisory boards can validate which skills to include in your program. I've been a part of a multiple, I would say, probably 10 plus ASC Education Foundation reaccreditations. And almost every single reaccreditation, the philosophy of the school is to hit the ETL with 8,000 pages of curriculum that are impossible for that individual to look at. And they see that there's so much wealth of content that they go, wow, you guys are doing a good job. You cover all this material. You must be doing something right. They sign off on it, right? Or when they bring that same curriculum to advisory board, right? How often does your advisory board meet? Meets twice a year in most markets, right? At least if you're ASC accredited. And you're probably meeting for 1 to 2 hours, maybe 3, right? But in reality, giving them 8,000 pages of document to look at is not going to help you align your curriculum to your market, right? So don't overwhelm them with reviewing your curriculum. Ask them instead, what do students need to be able to do upon completion of our program? And reverse engineer the tasks from those pieces, right? And that's a much cleaner way of addressing how do you start to build out a curriculum than hitting them with 8,000 pages of material and having them read through it, because they're not going to read it, right? They don't have the time to read it. They're going to go back to the office, and in 6 months they'll be back and they'll say, I've read 2 pages of it or 10 pages of it, but they're not going to read all. And at 8,000 is probably an overestimation, right? Unless you see Toyota T10's curriculum, then it might be correct. But I guess my big point here is they're validating your program, right? They're telling you what needs to be in your market, right? When you talk about advisory board composition in your market, who should be on the advisory board for an EV program and why? Right now, if you put Chevy dealers on there and Ford dealers on there, many of them will tell you don't bother with EVs, right? And the reason for that, the reasons are political, the reasons are business related, right? There are multiple reasons why, for and against EVs right now, depending on who you ask. So who needs to be on the advisory board program for an EV program? EV manufacturers, right? If you have a strong Tesla market, if you have a strong Rivian market, those are, pretty easy places to start. Transit companies. Every transit company in the United States is currently applying for funding to convert to electrified buses to the tune of billions of dollars a year. A big part of that transition is transitioning their workforce to be able to work on electrified powertrains. So with that being said, you will probably want to reach out to folks from your local transit companies. And for those of you that have light duty programs, you're probably going, well, we're light duty. And this is where I say with EV, it becomes a little ambiguous as to heavy duty, light duty. There's a lot of the same technologies. Granted, some are bigger and larger, higher voltages, lesser voltages, dependent. But at the same time, a lot of the competencies and the skills are universal. Municipalities are another area, right? For the most part, the government incentives that are out there for the purchase of EVs right now are going to municipalities, right? And they are looking for an able workforce. So those are the fleet managers, technicians from those agencies would be good people to enlist as a part of your advisory board. And finally, dealers and independent repair EV specialists, right? I think about Toyota, the Toyota market, right? And how long they've been involved in the hybrid electric vehicle, right? They have one of the only OEM programs right now, Toyota T10, that results in OE level certification for their 071 and 072 classes. So that's what we need to start thinking about. And why? Because if you have the wrong people on your advisory board, you're probably going to get information that is not really aligned to what the need is for that EV community. So another piece to think about. All right, finally, in wrapping this up, in terms of aligning identified skills with PLOs and CLOs, if that's not a term that you're familiar with, program learning outcome and course learning outcome. In other words, for every curriculum that's at the high school or college level, it's the phrase that begins with at the end of this program or course, the student should be able to, right? In terms of best practices here, if you're not familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, take a look at Bloom's and look at the higher level tasks or higher level verbs, let's say, on Bloom's taxonomy. You want to use the higher order Bloom's verbs that align with the skills that we're seeking to assess. You want to use actionable descriptions, right? At the end of the course, the student should be able to diagnose, right? Should be able to perform, should be able to analyze, should be able to evaluate, right? Create, maybe not. Maybe we're not creating unless we're in an EV program where a student has to create an EV drivetrain, right? But that could very well be. And when we build tasks that way, they're also becoming measurable, right? So if we say that at the end of the program, the student should be able to de-energize the high voltage system on a electrified powertrain vehicle, that's measurable. Can the student do it or not? Can they verify PPE? Can they do a live test? Can they physically shut down the high voltage system and confirm that it's shut down, right? So those high level CLOs and PLOs are going to be measurable, right? Stay away from terms like at the end of this program, the student should be able to remember or know, right? Those are nice, right? You can know a lot of things, but can you do it, right? And I think at the end of the day, we really need to be careful about aligning our programs to the skill set that our students need upon completion. So next steps. Building your program really begins with the end in mind, right? Identifying industry standards, cross-referencing publications, building a major content outline. From that major content outline, identifying the skills you want the student to be able to perform upon completion of the course or the program. You want to set objectives to meet those specific pieces, and then design your learning and assessment. And I write here, wash, rinse, and repeat. I've been fortunate enough over the years to work with the Toyota T10 program, and one philosophy there is that of Kaizen, right? Which is a term that's meaning change for the better or continuous improvement. And as you start to develop this, what you'll have in mind is, yes, we're starting with the end in mind, but you'll hit bumps along the way. Curriculum design is a never-ending process, right? You're never finished. So sorry to tell you, you're going to be doing this for the rest of your teaching career. But with that being said, hopefully this gives you a good starting place in terms of industry resources and some tips and techniques for how we can get our programs to the level that we want to. And with that, just want to close by saying, we do have a 3-day version of a little bit of what we talked about today available coming up here in July. We'd love to see you at an event if you're able to do that. Also wanted to make a couple of announcements coming in summer of 24. We have some curriculum resources coming out surrounding EV, as well as our 2024-2025 instructor training calendar that'll include live in-person events around the country. and a webinar series for educators that we're really, really excited about that we think will help inform some of the things that you're doing. And some of those will be curricular, some of them will be technology specific, but we're really, really excited about those announcements that we have coming up this summer. Also, this fall, we're releasing our 2-day electric vehicle essentials book, which is a book that we use to provide instruction to local municipalities, fleets, and transit companies. And we're making this available for purchase for post-secondary institutions that wish to do something similar at their schools. And it's curated exactly to that audience. So we'll give you the ability to offer some continuing ed classes and with a really, really nice companion guide. Don't have a total page count on it, but look over the summer for an announcement on that. We're working on and wrapping that up and getting that ready to go for publication this fall. So with that being said, if you need assistance with curriculum or if we can be of any help, please feel free and reach out to us, info@avtg.org. And our phone number's here as well. But I do, before we go, want to open it up to questions. And I realize we had a couple of questions here in the chat. And my friend Nolan, good to see you, Nolan. Nolan Worrell's out on the West Coast. He said, would it make sense for some programs to have 2 separate pathways, one for ICE and one for EV? Nolan, I think it's potentially the way that a lot of schools are probably going to have to go. But I think the other thing I want to mention is depends on what your advisory board says, right? In your case, I believe you're now affiliated with Rivian, which if you're preparing technicians to go directly into Rivian, right? Yeah, that's something that you probably would want to have you'd want representation from them on your advisory board and make a determination of that. Nolan asked, will the slide deck be available? Absolutely. We can make that available to you. And in fact, we'll take this entire webinar and post it on our YouTube channel. So look us up on YouTube. We'll be posting some curricular resources on there as well. From Nelson Kelly, is the ASE L3 test being updated? If so, when will that be ready? The answer to that is yes, it is being updated. It may be ready already. I can speak to the fact that I worked with Motor Age to redo the Motor Age L3 study guide probably about 6 months ago. So I know that was in the works. Some tasks being updated there. Remember the 3 types of hybrid electric vehicles, that's been expanded. Some terminology has been expanded. And there has been some addition to, on those L3 standards, some EVSE equipment related concerns, charging concerns, and things of that nature. So yes, Nelson, that is being updated. I don't know the exact timeline on the release of that. Okay. Any other questions before we wrap up today? All right, if you want, go ahead and just pop them in the chat. Give folks a moment in case there are any other questions that you'd like answered. Okay, just point you to also, Justin put a couple of links in the chat. There's a link for the summer events in there, both for the ASE National and for the NACAT conference coming up next month. Let's see here, a couple more questions. Steve Spada, is the ASE XEV level 3 standard and certification available yet? Not to my knowledge. Our YouTube channel is Advanced Vehicle Technology Group, Scott. Nelson, thank you. Will we get a link in our email to view this again? Yes. So this is being saved to the cloud. What I'll do is once I have this downloaded, I will go ahead and post this. Let's see. Oh, Justin, you might have to on those links switch over. Right now, it's going to hosts and panelists. So I think you got to open it up to participants. Thanks, Mike, for the comment on that. But yes, we will get this up on YouTube and send you guys out an email link to that so you can go back and review it as needed. Okay, hold on a second here. Let me see if I can do this. To everyone. Okay, there's the SAE. Hmm, hold on one second, guys. I'll make sure I get this in the chat for you here. Okay. Okay. They both, if the first link worked for the events, the other event is right on that page as well. Well, thank you, folks. We're just about at 2 o'clock here. I want to thank you for spending an hour with us today. Hopefully, this was something that you guys can take back and have some actionable items on. Look forward to seeing some of you this summer at the national conferences, and look forward to meeting you in person. Have a great day, and thanks for being with us.